Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narativ. Breaking news tonight. The first details of Volodymyr Zelensky's victory plan for Ukraine are beginning to leak out. It's a broad, ambitious plan to defeat Russia in just a matter of months. I'll ask former U.S. Ambassador Kurt Volker about the plan. All of that is coming up here on Narativ. Joe Biden may be 81 years old, too old to be president or even run in a presidential election. But that has not stopped the 46th president from presidenting in a very big way. As we've all been focusing on the horse race election, Joe Biden has been hard at work, checking off items on his to-do list, which he hopes to finish by the time his term as president ends. Chief amongst those items is ending the Ukraine war. Now, that seems very unlikely in the 3 months Biden has left. But as Biden likes to tell us often, nothing is impossible if you're the United States of America. In the past, I've dubbed the way the Biden administration handles its foreign policy as diplomatic jiu-jitsu, a simultaneous group of actions, all coordinated to achieve a certain result that happens so quickly you might miss them if you blink. Biden has until January to end the war in Ukraine. And that happens to be the exact same timetable Volodymyr Zelensky has laid out for what he calls his victory plan. Tomorrow, on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, Zelensky will brief Biden about the victory plan before he shares it with other world leaders. Zelensky's plan is audacious. It's a 4-point plan that includes military, diplomatic, political, and economic measures that will box Russia in, making Russians believe that defeat is inevitable and force a Russian retreat. It may be a Ukraine victory plan in name, but it's more accurately a make Russia believe it's losing plan. Zelensky is certainly a historic figure with enormous skills, and he's very persuasive. But such a plan requires the coordination of many entities and nation states that only a powerhouse like the United States can pull off. Perhaps that's the reason Zelensky happened to begin his trip to the United States, not in New York City, where the United Nations is, but in Scranton, Pennsylvania, home of the Scranton munitions factory, and something else. Putin has warned that any escalation will be viewed as opening a direct war with NATO, but his threats are no longer credible. Ukraine's Kursk offensive has been remarkably effective, and things are about to get much worse for Russia. If Ukrainian allies give Zelensky the go-ahead to use missiles on Russian targets inside of Russia, the Kursk offensive will seem like a gentle stroll in the park compared to what's about to arrive. Victory in Ukraine in 3 months seems impossible, but to hear Zelensky talk about it, Russia's defeat is certain, especially because of the role the United States and President Joe Biden is playing. Now, he may be the sleepy 81-year-old president, but that doesn't mean he's too old for diplomatic jiu-jitsu. My very special guest tonight is Ambassador Kurt Volker. Ambassador Volker has over 35 years of experience in foreign policy and national security roles, including serving as the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations from 2017 to 2019. Currently, Ambassador Volker is the president and founder of Alliance Strategic Advisors, a distinguished fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, and a senior international advisor at BGR Group. And we're thrilled and honored to have Ambassador Kurt Volker on Narativ this evening to talk about this extraordinary shift in the Ukraine war. How are you, Ambassador?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. We've all gotten used to seeing a lot of plans about resolving this war in Ukraine. This is certainly not the first one. None of them have really succeeded. Why is this one going to be different?
We have already on the table from Zelensky a so-called peace plan, which is UN principles dressed up and saying things like Russia has to respect Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, crime of aggression, human rights, all those things. This plan is different because it is meant to answer the question that the U.S. is persistently asking Ukraine. Okay, if we give you these long-range weapons, or if we give you this, or we do that, what's the strategy? How is this going to make a difference? How is this going to win the war? The Ukraine have put together a plan now that they hope answers that question, that they hope says, okay, if you do, this is the way we will go about prosecuting the war. It will make a difference. It will lead to a Ukrainian victory. That's what they want to project.
Right. And it's certainly a far more urgent timeline than we've seen before, while President Biden is still in office, to make all of this work. I don't know if that's the guiding influence there, but he has pointed to October to December as a period of time they'll be needing urgent coordination by all the world powers.
Yeah, there are some actual reasons on the ground why that's true. But then there's also the obvious political reasons in the United States. And taking advantage of the possibility that President Biden may want to leave more of a legacy behind him about Ukraine succeeding. Up until now, the Biden administration has been extraordinarily cautious and avoiding any kind of steps that they fear that the Russians might portray as escalation or a direct conflict between the U.S. and Russia or NATO and Russia. But that has actually enabled Russia to prolong this war, to keep fighting, to kill more Ukrainians over the course of time. And now with Biden facing the certainty of leaving office in January, maybe there is an element of legacy that he would like to leave behind and see what he can do before the next president takes over. It could be Donald Trump, in which case he might be worried Trump would not support Ukraine. I don't know if that's well-founded or not, but Biden might think that. Or it could be Kamala Harris, and he might say, I'm going to take the tough decisions now so that she doesn't have to, and get that out of the way. So either way, there might be a moment in U.S. politics.
Now, Volodymyr Zelensky has gone out of his way to emphasize that part of the plan is really a partnership with the United States. Tomorrow, he'll present this to Biden on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, but clearly there's been a lot of communication between the United States and the Ukrainians on how it will be executed.
I'm not sure that has been discussed in any great detail. I think this truly is coming from Zelensky and his chief of presidential administration, Andriy Yermak. I think that's why it's so closely held, is really coming from them and the leaders of their military, of course. What I think you're going to see is an explanation that the use of long-range munitions striking deep inside Russia, but also the Kerch Strait Bridge, the land bridge that connects Russia across southern Ukraine to Crimea, taking out these things, logistics, fuel depots, rail lines, road lines, the bridge itself, ferry traffic across the Sea of Azov. Taking all of that out will make it very difficult for Russia to sustain its forces in the field. They'll have a real logistical supply problem. In addition to that, by expanding the front line inside Russian territory itself, as they've already done in Kursk, they're setting up a different dynamic for a future negotiation. It's no longer one of just Ukraine giving up territory in exchange for peace. It is now a trade. It's now Russia getting something and Ukraine getting something. And at the end of that, there should be a border and there should be peace. That's what they're trying to set up.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what Zelensky has pointed out. This might be called a victory plan, but really it's about convincing Vladimir Putin and the Russians that they are going to lose. And in order to do that, they've come up with this four-pronged attack. There's a military plan, there's a political plan, a diplomatic plan, and an economic plan. This is not just about capturing targets on the battlefield. Can you talk a little bit about that broad nature of this plan, why it has to include all these other aspects?
Yeah, the most important of all the other aspects is the economy. Mm-hmm. Russia has an extraction-based economy, natural resource-based. It's having challenges with global markets and it's having challenges with its payment systems because of the sanctions that have been imposed. It is overcoming some of these challenges. They found replacement buyers. They found banks willing to do business with Russia, but it is not as profitable and it is not as clear that it is sustainable in the long run as what they had before. They're having some economic challenges. They're also having challenges to their defense industry. The ability to produce sophisticated weapons with precision-guided munitions is dependent upon the access to chips and access to other critical minerals and goods. And Russia's having a harder time with that. They're resorting to already produced weapons that are being sold back to them by North Korea or drones that are coming from Iran. So Russia's having economic challenges. Zelensky can flip it the other way and say not only that, but Ukraine now can be the recipient of foreign investment, developing its energy sector, becoming a net energy exporter, supplanting Russian supplies to Europe with Ukrainian supplies to Europe, getting more economic growth, which is then going to improve tax revenue collection in Ukraine. All of those things would show that the Ukrainian economy would be more robust and have a better forward potential as compared with the Russian economy. So this is a critical element. And one more key piece of this economic picture is the ports of Odessa and Mykolaiv. That is really the economic lifeline of Ukraine to the rest of the world because of the scale of shipping that you can do through there. Getting Russia neutralized in Crimea, if not out of Crimea, is what will make sure that those shipping routes are safe and what will enable the Ukrainian economy to bounce back as much as possible. So these things are integrated, the military effort and the economic effort.
It's such an aggressive plan to really flip the script on Putin and Russia in every way. He seems to be able to do it. The Kursk incursion has been very successful, and it may be a little difficult to hold on to it, but up until now, it certainly has, surprised everybody in Russia and changed the perception of most Russians, especially the elite, in terms of whether they can win this war. Now, if he starts doing that on all these other fronts, on the economic front and on the oil and gas fronts, boy, that's going to change things a lot.
I think that's right. And I think that is exactly the intention. Now, speaking about the United States and the West, we have tended every step of the way to overestimate Russia. Even at the very beginning of the war, we thought that Ukraine wouldn't stand a chance. Kyiv would fall in a matter of days and so forth. Not the case. And then we looked at Russia's ability to wage a war of attrition and grind away and use these meat wave attacks and just wear down the Ukrainians. That hasn't happened either. The Russians actually have far more challenges than we have estimated. And I think what Zelensky is doing is trying to pinpoint that and say Ukraine has the opportunity to actually gain more of an advantage here if we recognize those weaknesses and exploit them.
And along with that comes this conversation about these long-range weapons and missiles being able to strike targets inside Russia. There are some European leaders who have come along and they've said, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Zelensky should be able to do this. The United States has not yet said that. And as late as this morning, I think Biden said he had not yet made a decision on anything like that. But that surely is coming.
I hope it's coming. I really hope it's coming. It's hard to find any justification for not giving Ukraine the authorization to use these weapons at a long distance. We've already provided the weapons. We're just telling them don't do it.
Yeah.
And Russia is nonetheless striking Ukraine from those distances and hitting Ukrainian civilians, cities, electricity infrastructure, especially as you go into another winter, which is why some of this timing issues of up till December are important for the Ukrainians. There's no reason to be holding back on this. And I'm hoping that this presentation of a victory plan becomes the hook that the Biden administration can use for justifying a change in policy.
The scenes that we've been seeing, those ammunition depots being blown up, are really impressive. And Russia really has not faced these kind of assault inside their territory for as long as I've been alive, really.
It predates us. It happened in World War II, and it was the Germans who were doing it.
Yeah.
And that is something, you mentioned Russian elites. I think that's something that Russian elites are in fact realizing, is that Vladimir Putin is the first Russian leader since World War II to have provoked an attack against Russia and a loss of Russian territory and significant attacks deep inside Russia. This is something where the elites have got to be questioning, is his leadership doing the right thing for Russia here? Maybe we should be doing something different.
This is potentially Joe Biden's biggest legacy. He could walk away from his presidency having won the war in Ukraine, and potentially that could lead to questions around whether Putin can stay in power, as you point out. That would be a remarkable term, to put it lightly, as a U.S. president. He would have achieved the unthinkable, really. I think it's quietly, as he always does, working away and trying to win this war while there's all this electioneering going on the sidelines. It's interesting to watch him work that way. What's your assessment of that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the way Biden thinks about this is part of the legacy is having helped Ukraine survive. That's different than saying Ukraine wins. And also having avoided World War III. He didn't let this get into a much bigger global conflict or an exchange of nuclear weapons or any nuclear use. He prevented that. I think those are the things that he latches onto as a legacy. Now, what I think is becoming more and more apparent is that Ukraine surviving is not enough, because Russia will continue the fight and they will continue to kill and destroy. And the risk of that wider war remains out there as long as Ukraine hasn't yet won. And that, I think, is what may be shifting now, is he's no longer looking at his own re-election. He's looking at what legacy does he leave behind. He needs to have Ukraine in a much stronger position. So I hope that's where this is all headed.
And of course, that implies what happens to democracy around the world. The Ukrainian war is really about democracy. And Biden's big theme throughout his entire administration has been about saving democracies.
Be clear, everyone is watching. The Chinese are watching, the Iranians are watching, the North Koreans are watching, the Venezuelans are watching. And if Ukraine falls, whether it's on Biden's watch or on Trump's watch or Kamala Harris's watch, all of those tyrants are going to take heart and double down on their efforts to get what they want.
Ambassador Kurt Volker, thank you so much for being with me tonight on Narativ. It's been fascinating talking to you and really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much, Seth.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives.